everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about fractions on a number line. So we have talked about what fractions are, and we've been talking about our numerator and denominator and proper fractions, but today we're going to be talking about how to put a fraction on a number line and how to put it in between the number 0 and the number 1. So first of all, before we get into it, we're going to talk about what is a fraction. Well, a fraction is a part of a whole. It is when you take a whole and divide it into equal parts. Remember, the parts have to be equal for it to be considered a fraction. The whole is the object being divided. So with our normal fractions, we're taking the number 1 and dividing it into small pieces. Or you can think about it as like a pizza or a pie, whatever sweet you like, and you can think about splitting it into equal pieces and sharing it with other people. A fraction is similar to division because that's what we're doing. We're dividing up a whole and making smaller equal parts. Next, we have our two main words. We have numerator and denominator. Okay, we're going to practice saying these words because they can be a little bit hard to say for third graders. So with me, I want you to try this. Numerator. All right, now it's your turn. Numerator. Good. Let's do it one more time. Numerator. So it's a numerator, and that is our top number. And remember, we know that it is on top because the N in numerator stands for north, and the direction north is pointing up. Yes, so we have our numerator on top, and then below that we have our denominator. And we're going to practice saying that together with our claps. Denominator. Now join in with me. Denominator. One more time. Denominator. Our denominator goes below the numerator because that is our main part of our fraction. It's the total down there, okay? And remember, we know that denominator goes below the fraction bar because D stands for down. Down below the fraction bar is where the denominator goes. Our numerator is our part, and the bottom is our total. So the numerator is usually the part that's being colored in or the part that's missing, and then the denominator is the bottom part, which is the total altogether piece. Okay, we've been looking at this fraction, this example of this fraction for a while now. It's a great example though because it has one whole watermelon, and it shows you that you can divide it in several ways. You could divide this into thirds, fifths, sevenths, eighths. Here we have it divided into halves and into fourths. The important part that I want you to take away from this is that the bigger the bottom number gets, so the bigger the denominator gets, over here it's 4, the smaller the pieces get. And that's going to be really important when we're talking about comparing fractions. Because you might think, well, Ms. Weaver, 1/4 must be bigger than 1/2 because 4 is bigger than 2. But it's actually the reverse because 1/4 is when you cut it into more pieces. So the more pieces you're cutting that whole into, the smaller your pieces are getting. If I decided to keep this watermelon for just myself, my one person, I'm going to eat the whole thing. But if I have to split it between my 18 students in my class, then we're all going to get very, very small pieces because I'm splitting it between a lot of people. So the bigger the bottom number is, the smaller the fraction actually is itself. All right, let's talk about what is a proper fraction. A proper fraction is one that follows the rules. It's when your numerator is smaller than your denominator. These are the normal fractions we're going to be looking at today. Next, let's talk about our adding fractions with like denominators. Remember, when you're adding fractions, the bottom number has to be the same, and the bottom number stays the same. It's not going to change. How we're splitting up the fraction is not changing. What's changing is how many pieces we're coloring in or how many pieces we're uncoloring. So here we have 2/4 colored in plus 1/4 colored in. So if I add these two together, it's going to result in 3 parts being colored in. And the bottom number is still going to stay 4 because this fraction is still going to be divided into fourths. We are not adding the denominators together. The denominator stays the same. Okay, we do not add the denominators together because the fraction itself is not changing, just the amount that's colored in. So the only part changing is the numerator, which we either add together or subtract. So here we have 3/4, and we see 1, 2, 3 out of 4 sections are colored in. So that's how we got our answer there. All right, let's talk about proper fractions on a number line. All the numbers fall in between 0 and 1. This is what I was trying to say a couple of lessons ago. When you are dividing a fraction, when you're making a fraction, it's like you're taking the number 1, which is a very small number. you're cutting it up into equal parts. Okay, so this is what's less than 1. It's kind of a good thing to think about like a ruler. If you have like 1 inch, like you can have a 1 inch that's about this long, but in between that 1 inch, you have a half an inch, a fourth an inch, 3/4 of an inch. You have eighths of inches, 16ths of inches, because you can get very smaller. You can get much smaller than just 1. Okay, so we can go in between 0 and 1, and that's what this number line is doing. So at the beginning of our number line, we always start with 0, and at the end, you might be surprised to see the number 1, but this is actually our whole. Okay, so I want you to kind of keep that in your mind. Like, don't be confused. This is between 0 and 1, which 1 is our whole. 1 means all of the pieces of this fraction are colored in. So how do we figure out what fraction this number line is showing? Well, it's actually pretty easy. We already know how to count the spaces, so that's what we're going to do. To get the denominator, which is our bottom number, the total, we're going to count the total amount of spaces. 1, 2, 3. So 3 is our denominator because there are 3 total spaces. Next, we're going to talk about our numerator. Our numerator is how many sections are colored in. It's very important to know. You do not count the tick marks. You actually count the spaces in between the tick marks. So here I have my first tick mark, and this is where our point is at. So we're only counting the spaces in between 0 and this tick mark, which is just 1 space. So my answer here is going to be 1 on top for my numerator and 3 on the bottom as my denominator, or as we would say it, 1/3. It'll come on. Oh, this is how we count our denominator. 1, 2, 3. That's how we got our denominator for all of these fractions. And then to get our numerators for these fractions, we would say, okay, this is our first mark because this is 1/3. This is our 2/3 mark because this is where it's falling. 2 sections will be colored in here. And 3/3 would actually be our last mark because that is our whole. That would mean that all of the sections are colored in. 3 out of 3 are colored in. But for finding what fraction we are looking at here on the number line, it's going to be 1/3 because 1 section is colored in out of 3. That's where our orange mark is at. Okay? So let's talk about this next fraction. Let's go through and count the number of spaces first to get our denominator. Okay? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6 is going to be my denominator. At every single tick mark, that is going to be my denominator. 6 is going to be the denominator for the whole thing because it's divided into 6 pieces. So the bottom number for all of our fractions on this number line are 6. So I can go in and mark that there are 6 different places. There are 6 different spaces there. So that's our denominator. As you see, we have 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, and 6. So this number line is divided into sixths. Next, we count up our number line. This is very easy. You just start with the first tick mark here. That's not on 0, obviously. This is not going to be counted because this would actually be 0/6, and that's equal to 0. So we would start here with our first space that's colored in. That would be 1/6. 2 spaces would be 2/6. 3 spaces would be 3/6. 4 spaces would be 4/6. 5 spaces would be 5/6. And our total would be 6/6. It means all of them are colored in. If we look carefully on our number line, we're looking at where the point has been plotted, and it has been plotted right here on this first tick mark. So we know that our answer here for what fraction the number line shows is 1/6, okay? Because it's only 1 section out of 6 colored in. Next, let's look at this one. We have our point down here. So let's go ahead and figure out our denominator. Our denominator is our bottom number, which is the total. Let's count up that total. We have 1 space, 2 spaces, 3 spaces, 4 spaces, 5 spaces, and 6 spaces again. So I know that 6 is going to be my denominator again. Here we have 6 as our denominator for all of the fractions. Your denominator is going to be the same for all the fractions on this number line because you divided this number line into sixths. We divided the number 1 into 6 different pieces to share. Next, we're going to count how many spaces, not tick marks, it takes to get to the point. It takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces to get to the tick mark. So I know that my answer is going to be 5 out of 6, or 5/6, because we have 5 sections colored in out of 6 sections altogether. All right, we're going to do, I thought we were going to do one more. Nope, that's it. So when you are plotting your numbers on your number line, your fractions, just make sure you count the total number of spaces between 0 and 1 to get your denominator. That's your bottom number. And then count the spaces in between each tick mark to get to your point. And however many it takes to get to your point is going to be your numerator. Make sure you're counting the spaces in between the tick marks and not the actual tick mark. Because if you start counting your tick marks here at 0, it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that's not correct because we're not counting 0 as a tick mark. That's why I say count the spaces in between. So here we have space 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 5 is our numerator here because it has 5 spaces colored in. I hope this video helps explain fractions on the number line. If you need any help, please feel free to reach out and ask. I'd be more than happy to help. Bye, guys.